So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the decision support tools that the Nature Conservancy has developed for the public and professionals to use to try to make better decisions around restoration activities, and how in that process we have realized that there's a lot of synergy in trying to find projects that have both benefits for people and for nature. So we've currently developed 3 decision support tools that are available on our Coastal Resilience platform. I'll have a link drop to that at the end of this presentation. The first one is a marsh migration tool, and then we have a coastal risk explorer and an aquatic barrier prioritization, and then I'm going to tease one that we're working on right now. But I wanted to talk you through kind of how we got to this point. So we started, my boss, Jeremy Bell, is our coastal restoration director, and he started probably 5 or 6 years ago now, with building this marsh migration tool, trying to do a GIS exercise that would help himself and other organizations interested in these things to figure out where we might have areas that marshes are going to migrate in the current sea level rise scenarios. So this is a tool you can go on, put in your town, and it'll zoom in and show you areas where there are currently salt marshes and areas where there might be salt marshes given a certain sea level rise scenario, and then you can put in whatever sea level rise prediction you're looking to assess. So this is available, as I said, you can find it yourself. And what we found is these areas were often correlated with areas where we had low roads or undersized culverts, or both, where you'd have high tides that were trying to get up into areas like this area here above a road. Typically probably would be salt marsh. As sea level rise, that size of that salt marsh would increase. Those are all things that we look to do for restoration activities. But this undersized crossing was blocking that and preventing even the existing salt marsh from being salt marsh. And so thinking about that, there is an obvious correlation here between the public safety aspects of doing this project and the restoration activities here. If we were to increase the size of this crossing so that water would flow back and forth so that we would restore this marsh, that also removes a potential flood risk or high tide issue on this road that would inundate it and cut off all of these homes down here from emergency services and from getting off of the peninsula. And so because of that, we realized that getting these projects done often is easier if we make the argument from the public safety side rather than the restoration side. We can bring dollars in to help solve these problems. So we built the Coastal Risk Explorer, which is specifically just looking at these areas where we might have roads that are inundated at high tide scenarios, or specific crossings that might be problematic in high tide scenarios that would result in lots of populations being cut off from emergency services and other necessary services. So in here, it's the same idea as the marsh migration. You can go in and just select the sea level rise scenario that you want to look at, and it will tell you the number of houses that might be cut off in a specific section of roads. This Eileen Johnson is going to be speaking about the Social Vulnerability Index and this tool in more depth, so I'm gonna put a pin in that here. But this is a little bit more about the data that went into that, but she's going to go into that a lot deeper. So I'm going to jump right to what I'm going to spend the majority of this presentation talking about, which is the analog to both of those tools for inland areas. So that was strictly dealing with sea level rise scenarios and coastal areas, coastal flooding, marsh migration, restoration, etc. But we also have a lot of data, and the majority of the work that I do is working with inland communities to try to create solutions for fish migration. The most obvious being Atlantic salmon. Atlantic salmon need to get up to the headwaters, some of the areas in northern Maine, so that they can spawn in those headwater streams and then run back down to the ocean. And dams and undersized road stream crossings, culverts, often block them from getting to those habitats. So to that end, we have created a statewide aquatic barrier prioritization tool. There is flood risk data in this as well, which I will get to. And you can access it at this maps.coastalresilience.org/Maine, and that will get you to all of the tools. All of them are in the same platform where you can access this Coastal Risk Explorer, the marsh migration, and the statewide aquatic barrier prioritization. So in order to make this work, we had Josh Wright, who was our senior conservation scientist, had a wonderful idea that he partnered with NRCS and Maine Audubon to actually get a handle on how bad these crossings were. So we, for the past 10 years, sent crews out to every single site in where a road and stream crosses in the state to assess what was there, and if it was bad for fish passage, to take measurements on it, so that we could get a handle on where these crossings were and how bad of a barrier they were to fish passage. So now, 10 years later, we have the entire state covered. It's about 95%. There's about 5% we didn't get to, both public and private crossings. And there's about 25,000, it's actually 26,401 surveyed crossings across the state that we have visited. At TNC, we were interested in really finding, where are the best projects where we can, do some culvert replacements, some bridge replacements, some dam removals to get, benefits for Atlantic salmon populations, or alewife or herring, or the variety of other sea-run fish in our state. So we created this aquatic barrier prioritization. So you can go to this tool, you click over here and get this to pull up for you, and it will rank these crossings. It's got the tier right here. So tier 1 is one of the best projects in the state, and there's a total of 3 tiers represented here. So you can tell whether or not it's a good crossing, and it's rated, prioritized by the amount of habitat that's upstream of it, and then how hard it would be for the fish to move up and downstream. So things like a downstream barrier. If there's no downstream barriers, then it can get all the way down to the ocean. Then that's a good thing. So it would rank higher for that. These are not the only metrics. There's a whole suite of 30 or 40 metrics that went in and got weighted, and they're done species specifically in here as well. When you come across a barrier like this is an undersized culvert. It doesn't have the enough capacity to handle the flows that it's seeing, which is why it's perched. So there's this waterfall. So if there's a problem for fish passage at this site, is there also a problem for the road? Will this scenario on the left result in this scenario on the right of a catastrophic road failure that is a huge problem for people during storms? So I have all this data. I've got 26,000 records out there, and I decided to see what it said. So I built a model to look at where we would find this overlap between culverts that are bad for fish passage and culverts that are bad for people, that are undersized for a 25-year flood event. And I picked that for a reason, and we'll get into that 25-year flood a little bit later. But for right now, just so you understand how this model works, it's a fairly basic idea, calculating the hydraulics of the upstream water surface elevation. So I know what the culvert geometry is from our surveyed crews. They went out and measured the inlets of all of these crossings. You can get estimates of flows at different flood recurrence intervals from StreamStats, which is a USGS program that basically uses regression statistical techniques to determine what the projected flow would be given the drainage area above the crossing or point in the river that you're looking at. And that will spit out results for all of the recurrence intervals from 5, 10, 25, up to a 100-year flood event. And so doing that, I was able to calculate the upstream water surface elevation for each of these different recurrence intervals, and then compare that to the road. And when the water was over the road, we determined that is likely to be a problem for people. It's no guarantee that the culvert will fail, but it's a pretty good place to look if you're looking for crossings that are in potential for failing. So when I ran this model and I got the results back, we know from our original surveys that about 10,000 of those 26,000 crossings are a barrier to fish passage. When I looked at the modeled culverts in that population that would overtop during a 25-year flood event or less, so it could have overtopped in a 5-year flood event, but it definitely overtopped in a 25-year. That's about 4,683. If we overlay both of those, what we find is that instead of seeing something like this Venn diagram where there's just a little bit of overlap here, it actually looks something a lot more like this. There's only about 100 crossings that won't pass a 25-year flood event that are barriers to fish passage. And this is super exciting for me, because what this means is that we have that intersection between projects that benefit people and projects that benefit nature. We can find these 4,000, 5,000 crossings in the state and replace them and have demonstrable benefits to decreased flood risk, and also getting fish to very, very critical habitats that they need to survive. And just want to unpack the recurrence interval stuff just a little bit, because this often gets confusing for people. A 25-year flood event is just a look back at the historical record to see how many times did this flood occur in a 100-year period. And it's not saying that it's going to happen every 25 years. It's really easy to interpret it that way, but it's a statistical way of looking at it. So what it really means is every given year, it has a 4% chance of overtopping the road. So a 25-year flood has a 4% chance every year, and that resets every year. So you could have 4 years in a row where you have a 25-year flood event that just happens to meet that statistical threshold of happening for a 4% chance each year. It's not saying it's going to happen every 25 years. It's just saying it has a 4% chance of happening every year. Same thing with a 100-year. It's 1 in 100. That means it has a 1% chance of happening every year. How I like to communicate this is to put it at a time frame that makes sense to people. So a 30-year time frame is a good planning horizon time frame for municipalities, and it's typically one that they look for. And if we project out those statistics for that time period, what we find is that a 25-year flood has a 66% chance of happening over the next 30 years. This is a study that NOAA did a number of years ago, and it indicates that we're seeing almost 100% increase of frequency of big storm events in the Northeast and in Maine. So that basically means that 25-year flood event, or that 66% chance of happening in 30 years, is really more like a 10-year flood event and a 75% chance of happening in 30 years. So I'm pretty comfortable with using that threshold of saying if it doesn't pass a 25-year flood event as projected now, that's definitely going to be an issue for flooding and for people's public safety in the future. And so this data is currently available for you to see in the aquatic barrier prioritization tool. You can see right here, there's a flood risk high. So that means that this crossing that we clicked on populated all of these areas. This has either a 25-year or less flood event is going to overwhelm the road there. This is a great opportunity for practitioners doing fish passage work to go in and come up with an argument to help a municipality agree to do a project. It's also a great opportunity to maybe bring funds from public safety to match funds for fish passage restoration dollars that they can then use together to come up with the money to put in a higher capacity crossing at these sites. But this was built specifically for fish passage reasons. That tool, the aquatic barrier prioritization tool, is designed explicitly for practitioners like myself, people that have some GIS skills and have some knowledge about fish passage issues. So we really want to get this data in the hands of municipalities in a way that a town manager or a road commissioner can really use. So we're going to build another tool that's going to be an analog to the Flood Risk Explorer, to the Coastal Risk Explorer, sorry, that's the Inland Flood Risk Explorer, so that we'll have a sister tool for anyone that wants to see where the flooding issues are in areas that aren't in the coastal Maine. And it's going to look something like this, where we're going to have these dots on the map that are color-coded to tell you, what flood recurrence interval will overtop the road. So this one is a 2-year event, just every other year. This one's likely to overtop the road. And then also we'll serve some of that fish passage information. You can see a little fish icon in there as being red, which means it's a fish passage barrier. So we could find something like this, where you've got a road that's likely to overtop in a 10-year flood event. That's about a 75% chance in 30 years. And it's red, meaning it's a complete barrier to fish passage. So this would be a perfect opportunity for us to replace a crossing that will benefit both people and nature. And that's where we're going to end today, except I'm going to beg for your help. I have this data. The data is available on that tool. You can give me a call. I can get you a copy of it if you are GIS friendly and you want to load it into your own software. But we need 2 things in order to make this very useful. One is that this data is 10 years old, some of it. So we need to have an understanding of when these crossings have been replaced or when new ones have gone in areas that weren't surveyed. So if anyone here knows of crossings that have been replaced, I would love an email giving me some information and some pictures on that so that we can keep this database up to date and useful as we move into the future. The other thing I need help with is testing this model accuracy. So I have done some ground truthing with it, and it tends to work pretty well. But any observations that any of you have of road overtopping and knowledge of what the flood events were, or even the time when that flood that overtopped it happened, and then I can do some research to figure out what the flow was, that would be super helpful so I can ground truth this data. So I don't know if this is a good idea to do in a public forum, but I am going to give my email address and phone number. please feel free to reach out, shoot me an email, give me a call if you have any of this information or you have any more questions about any of this stuff.